Hello viewers, Saipedia. First step to success. Welcome to our channel. Subscribe our channel to support our videos. This video deals with literary forms. Here we are going to analyze poetry. In poetry, we can use many forms of writings. Here we are going to see 5 topics: metrical romance, ballad, lyric, sonnet, allegory. Poetry. Poetry is the oldest form of literature based on the interplay of words and rhythm. It often employs rhyme and meter, a set of rules governing the number and arrangements of syllable in each line. A poem filled with imagination, emotion and fancy. By combining rhythmic language with imagination, a poet conveys thoughts and emotions. There are 2 ways in which poetry can be written, namely subjective poetry and objective poetry. Subjective poetry is considered personal because the poet brings out his own feelings and thoughts. Objective poetry is older than subjective poetry. Objective poetry is that in which the world outside the poet is expressed. The communal ballad, the epic and the drama were the earliest forms of objective poetry. Metrical romance. The metrical romance is also known as romantic poetry. It is a kind of poetry dealing with the emotions or phase of life, and the story is told in a simple, straightforward and realistic manner. It has a happy ending whether love is involved or not. The Norman first brought this metrical romance into England in 12th century, and that was popular in the High Renaissance. It was a form of prose poetry that was popular among royals and the upper class. In the French originals of these romances, the lines were of definite length and meter, whereas in England, this metrical system came in contact with the uneven lines, the strong accent and the alliterations of the native songs, and the romances started being written in a variety of meters, both alliterative and rhyming. The old epic poems and native forms of verse were now rejected, and there was a demand for a new kind of story poem and rhyming measures which found its expressions in the metrical romance of the times, which brought to the public wonderful tales of brave knights, fair ladies, glorious adventurers and courtly love. Courtly love was a typical theme of metrical romance as well. Metrical romance was typically written in the language of Old French but was later reworked into German and English. These romantic narratives are all in Santaic verses, which is of 2 types: quatrains of 12 syllables lines in assonance and quatrains of 8 syllable lines in assonance. The 12 syllable line is much the more common of the 2. It is a vehicle not only of the greater number of the metrical romances but of the most of the saint legends, novenas and the other religious works. The metrical of the medieval romances are divided by scholars into 3 types of subjects: the matter of Britain, especially stories centering on the court of King Arthur; the matter of Rome, stories based on classical antiquity; the matter of France, Charlemagne and his knights. Metrical romance. Metrical romance have 2 words, meter and romance. Here, meter defined as the rhythm or measures in verse, and the romance is a story related to chivalry, the story involving knights, heroes, adventures and quest. And also romance is the story deals with love. So metrical romance are the poem about the adventure and love in certain type of meter. Ballad. A ballad is a simple narrative poem that tells a story usually in 4-line stanzas called quatrains. The word ballad is derived from the Latin ballare, which means to dance. This shows its connection with tribal dance. The ballad began to appear in England in 13th century. The central characteristics of the ballad are narrative presentation, simplicity, and spontaneity of expression. The three types of ballads are folk ballad, also called traditional ballad, literary ballad, also called modern ballad, and the last one, mock ballad. Folk ballads originated from the folk culture of each nation. The ballad mostly deals with love and adventure. The narrator generally begins with a climatic episode and tells the story by means of action and dialogues. These ballads use refrains and repetitions. Some famous folk ballads are Sir Patrick Spens, The Wife of Well, and Thomas the Rhymer. Literary ballad. Literary ballad, also called as modern ballad. Literary ballad is generally written by the learned poet in conscious and sophisticated imitations of the traditional ballad. Literary ballad shows an enlargement of description, psychological interest, and a more finished style. The most famous literary ballads are Rime of the Ancient Mariner, We Are Seven, The Tables Turned, La Bella Dame Sans Merci. And the last one, mock ballad. A minor form of literary ballad is the mock ballad, in which a comic theme is treated with a seriousness appropriate to a regular ballad. It shows the ballad conventions in all respects except in the choice of the theme. Cowper's John Gilpin is a fine example of a mock ballad. Lyric. Lyric is the most delightful and pleasing form of poetry. It is generally subjective. Lyric poetry in its original meaning was poetry composed to be sung to the accompaniment of a lyre. The lyre was a simple Greek musical instrument. A lyric poem is a comparatively short, non-narrative poem that expresses a single emotion in which a single speaker presents a state of mind or an emotional state. His thoughts, feelings, and emotions constitute the subject matter of his lyric. The lyric becomes a mirror of his personality. Some of the famous lyrics poems are Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey and Milton's On His Blindness. Subcategories of the lyrics are, for example, elegy, ode, sonnet, and grammatic monologue, and most occasional poetry. In modern usage, elegy is a formal lament for the death of a particular person. For example, Tennyson's In Memoriam A.H.H. An ode is a long lyric poem with a serious subject written in an elevated style. Famous examples are Wordsworth's Hymen to the Duty or Keats' Ode to a Grecian Urn. A dramatic monologue is a type of poem in which the speaker is directly addressing and talking to some other person. The speaker in which poems usually speaks alone in a one-way conversation, and so it is called monologue. Thank you for watching, and the last two topics are given in next videos. Happy learning!